but the worldview is completely not English, and the cadences of the rhythm of the words as well are more Nigerian than English. And I think using dialect is also part of being faithful to the way people speak as well. And Nigeria is a very class-divided society, and the way you talk, or the way you speak, and the way you use English, and the sort of words you use, automatically locks you in. So people know, how much education you've had, where you grew up, simply by the way you speak. And the girls in my book, the characters in my book, all grew up, different classes, different homes, and that was also important for me to be able to recreate that.
That's really awesome. That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for reading it and for coming. Next up, we have Anna Mioni, who is a translator from, well, she does a bunch of things, but first and foremost, she's a translator from English into Italian, and has, over the course of her career, translated more than 50 books, and she has a bios here somewhere, which give me 2 seconds to find, including works by Luc Sant, by Sam Lipsyte, who else did you translate? Lester Bangs, Daniel Handler, and Tom McCarthy, who she's going to read a bit of her translation from in a minute. In addition to being a translator, though, she's worked as a scout, an editor, a teacher of translations, of literary translations, and as a part-time digital librarian. She's also, and she'll talk about this as well, and we'll have a lot of questions about it, one of the founders of the Italian Translators Union, which is pretty interesting and unique. So I'd like to welcome Anna on stage. I believe you're going to start by reading, you and DW are going to read from the English and Italian version of C by Tom McCarthy.
Can you read from the...
Yeah. Are you going to go first? Yeah.
So I'm going to read just a couple of pages from McCarthy's novel C, the letter C, and then Anna will read a bit of her translation. In a room to the side of this one, schoolroom 2, Simon's son Serge spends what he has been told in passing, although only by the maid, is his 2.5 birthday, playing with wooden blocks. He sits on a floor which, unlike the bare wooden floor of schoolroom 1, is muffled by a rug. Morning sunshine falls in a long beam through the bow window, vaults the cozy recess seat that runs along the inside of the window's curve and comfortably lands among the rug's curling hairs. Rising from these, it hovers in jars and bottles in which labeled toys, horses, cars, clowns, and acrobats are stashed. More labels, unattached to objects, spill from a low table to spread a debris of words across the floor. The wooden blocks have geometric figures painted on them, like numbers on dice, squares, triangles, circles, and other more complex forms. On a single side of each block, the side that where it dice will bear the number 6. Several of these figures have been combined so as to form a picture of a cyclist, a house, a hippopotamus, or a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, for instance. Serge has stacked the magician above the cyclist, and above that a butcher who clutches a knife in one hand and a string of sausages in the other, holding them up for inspection, much as the magician does the rabbit. The figures all appear in profile, flat. The landscape across which the cyclist rides, made up of the rectangles and segments, is as shallow as the round wheels above which his trapezoid body sits, as though, even within the painted world of the block's surface, he were no more than a cardboard cutout posed in front of a piece of stage scenery. Serge ponders the combination for a while, then, holding cyclist and magician in place, removes the butcher and replaces him with a large, round hippopotamus, who wallows again in profile, in an elliptical pool of mud. Serge holds this new vertical line-up together while he contemplates it. Then, deciding it's satisfactory, he removes his hand from the stack. As soon as he does, it starts to wobble. The combined weight of hippo, mud, rabbit, and magician proving too much for the beleaguered cyclist, who's further let down by the soft, uneven surface underneath his wheels. As the blocks tumble, rung by trapezia and deltoids, flash and disappear in a frantic progression, spreading out across the rug. Serge looks up at the window, then at the white board on whose surface more geometry is displayed. Rows of round shapes with lines inside of them have been drawn out. The shapes modulate as they repeat, their curves narrowing or widening, their lines arcing and flexing as they process across the glass. Looking down again, Serge turns his attention to a toy soldier who's been resting until now against his thigh. Picking the soldier up, he holds him to his face. The soldier's eyes are neutral, gazing off into middle distance. His mouth is set in a calm, still expression that contains the tiniest hint of a smile. Serge lays the soldier front up on the rug, smoothing its hairs aside to form an enclave for the back to nestle in. The thick fibers thread and wrap around the soldier's sides. Serge reaches for one of the wooden blocks and, lifting it up above the soldier, slams it down hard on his face. The soldier's legs and feet jolt upwards as the comparatively huge slab hits him. Serge draws the block back, then slams it down into the soldier's face again. Then again, several times. When he's done smashing him, he holds the soldier up to inspect the damage. His eyes are unaffected, still vague and distant, but his mouth has been deformed. Its plaster dented and chipped away. Serge scrapes at the ground down surface with his thumbnail, lifting off more flakes of plaster. Then, to no one but himself, since he's alone, he says, "Wagner." He sets the soldier down gently on the rug, propping him up in a sitting position against the wooden block that's just mutilated him. Serge is reaching out towards another block when his attention is distracted by a hurried entrance of the family cat, and close on his tail, his older sister, Sophie. Sophie is half running, half skipping, with clenched hands held out in front of her. Placing herself between the cat and the door, she thrusts her hands toward the cat and sings.
In un'aula a fianco, l'aula 2, Serge, il figlio di Simeon, trascorre giocando con le costruzioni di legno il giorno in cui la cameriera, solo lei e nessun altro, en passant, gli ha detto che compie 2 anni e mezzo. È seduto su un pavimento che, al contrario di quello di legno nudo dell'aula 1, è smorzato da un tappeto. Il sole del mattino entra in un lungo raggio d'arbovindo, salta le comode panche sulla nicchia lungo la curva della finestra e atterra comodamente tra i peli arricciati del tappeto. Poi sale e vaga tra i vasi e le bocce in cui sono custoditi giocattoli etichettati, cavallucci, automobili, pagliacci e acrobati. Altre etichette, non attaccate agli oggetti, sporgono da un tavolino basso e seminano una confusione di parole sul pavimento. Sulle costruzioni di legno ci sono figure geometriche dipinte, come i numeri sui dadi quadrati, triangoli, cerchi e altre forme più complesse. Su un'unica faccia di ogni costruzione, quella destinata al numero 6 se fossero dadi, sono state combinate varie figure in modo da formare delle immagini: un ciclista, una casa, un ippopotamo o un prestigiatore che tira fuori il coniglio dal cappello, per esempio. Serge ha impilato il mago sopra il ciclista e sopra ha messo un macellaio che regge un coltello in una mano e una catena di salsicce nell'altra e le tiene sollevate per guardarle, un po' come fa il prestigiatore con il coniglio. Le figure appaiono tutte di profilo, piatte. Il paesaggio dove pedala il ciclista, fatto di rettangoli e segmenti, è piano come le ruote tonde sopra cui è seduto il suo corpo trapezoidale, come se persino all'interno del mondo dipinto sul blocchetto di legno non fosse altro che una silhouette di cartone in posa davanti a un elemento di arredo scenico. I think I'll stop here because it gets too boring. I'd rather talk about the act of translation or translation in general, or answer your question or something that maybe is a bit more interesting for the audience at the moment.
Okay, no problem, no problem. How did you get into being a translator?
Well, I've always translated in my life. It's a sort of, I don't know, I say that it is a virus, you have it in your blood and you can't get rid of it. First time I translated when I was 7. Was my brother had a Spanish teacher at school. I didn't take Spanish, but I took his homework with him, so I learned it too, and we had this book of lyrics of music. For me, music is a key to language, by a Chilean band, and they were translated into Italian with the text on the other page, and I perceived they were wrong, they were not enough literal, so I corrected them, and that was my first translation. And then when I was in junior high, I got into music, and so I wanted to know what my favorite bands were singing about, so I started translating songs. Then I switched to poetry. I was also writing poetry when I was younger, so I switched to poetry, and the first time I thought I could turn it into a job was when, after my major in Italian literature, I saw an ad on the paper that advertised a master in literary translation. So I said, let's try it. I never thought consciously that it could become seriously a real job, so I just said, okay, let's take this course and let's see what happens. And right after the course, I took an internship in a publishing house for translating a book by Edith Wharton, and that's where it all started. And it never stopped ever since. It was 14 years ago.
50 books over 14 years is an insane pace.
And well, I've also worked 2 or 3 days a week as a little librarian, because of course translation is not very well paid, so I'm holding 2 jobs.
Obviously you're a billionaire. Because it's super well paid. That's incredible. That's a lot of.
It was a lot.
Are there any books that you found particularly interesting? I know we were talking on the way in about how when you're reading and working on a book as a translation, you don't really get to read it as a reader or appreciate it in that way. You appreciate it in a very technical sort of way. Were there any writers or books that you translated that were really impressive or interesting to you in that technical way, or presented a certain sort of challenge that you really got into?
Well, I guess the most difficult one was Lester Banks, which you might know. He was a gonzo journalist and a rock critic, but he was also a beat writer, although he's not yet recognized as such, but in my opinion he's on the same level as Kerouac and the beat writers, because his prose is really amazing, and he doesn't really write only about music, but he writes about himself. So getting into his rhythm was really, really, really tough, but also very rewarding, and apparently the people in Italy were very happy with the translation, and that's been very satisfying because I spent a lot of passion in it. Another writer I liked a lot was Daniel Handler, also known as Lemon Snicket. He wrote 3 adult novels, one of which adverbs I've been lucky enough to